This morning and this afternoon, the whole day has been organised jointly between King's College London and the Balfour Project. My name is Adam Sutcliffe. I teach history, mostly Jewish history, but the early modern period up to the present, as well as other things, across the road in our history department. And so I'm very happy to welcome you here on behalf of King's.
How does one explain events in Palestine between 1918 and 1948? And the ambiguities, the twists and turns of British policy in Palestine. Palestine presents a unique situation which inevitably excludes numerical self-determination. We are definitely building for a Jewish numerical majority in the future. This was Foreign Minister Balfour to Justice Brandeis in 1919. Secondly, we meant a Jewish state. This is Prime Minister Lord George's reply to Chaim Weizmann, who had asked him what the Prime Minister had meant by a Jewish national home in the 1917 Declaration. These two quotes, in my view, begin to get to the heart of the matter, stripping away, as they do, 2 decades of British verbal camouflage.
The Zionist movement, or the leadership of the Zionist movement, I would say, the pro-Western, highly educated, and let's say with the Orientalist view of the local natives, etc., the long arm of the British imperialism and colonialism, they cooperated in order to come and settle in Palestine exclusively for the Jews. This actually part of the tragedy.
There had been much sniping in our street, our schools had closed, life was completely abnormal, it was impossible. So my parents, like so many Palestinian parents, thought, well, the best thing to do is we evacuate, we go somewhere and wait until the whole thing dies down. And that, of course, was the belief of all Palestinians. Nobody believed in 1948 that an obscenity like not allowing people to return to their homes could possibly occur. I can remember my parents would say, no, the British would never allow it. The United Nations would never allow it. And of course, it was allowed.
The conflict that we handed over is still with us. Its negative effect is very real, although sometimes hidden under the morass of other conflicts in the Middle East and around the world. I think it's negative for us, partly because of our partial responsibility for it, and partly because it affects both our values and our interests. Our values are those that we proclaim when we do go up that moral mountain and talk about the idea of equal rights, of upholding the law, of respecting international institutions and the rule of law. It affects our interests because I believe that this issue is one contributory factor in why misguided but young people from Cardiff head for Syria.
When I started making my film about Bethlehem, it was when just after Israel announced the route of the wall, and it was very clear that Bethlehem is going to be destroyed, really, as a city and as a community by virtue of this new development. An important city that is home to a vibrant Christian and Muslim communities that live in a harmonious and way and have lived for centuries. So it's an important model in the Middle East, is being destroyed, is being stifled out of existence, and to the benefit of whom?
Was the price worth paying for the state you see now, the price that I've just described? Was it actually worth paying, really, to displace a whole population, to cause misery to thousands and then millions of people, and to perpetuate these thefts and the assaults and the continuing colonization, of course, of the rest of Palestine's land, plus the occupation of the Golan Heights, plus the occupation of Palestinian territories, plus the belligerent stance towards Iran and towards any kind of development that might take place in the region. Was it worth it? Well, I would say to you, the answer for me is unequivocal. Nothing is worth that.
Regarding the very, very emotional question for me, for every Israeli, for every Jew, if it was worth it to establish the state of Israel. So maybe some of you British citizens or people around the world, for you maybe it's a theoretic question. For us, the mere question is shivering, especially for somebody like me who was born in Israel, fought in several wars, lost many friends my age. I think I lost a fifth of my close friends in the wars. We are surrounded by walls and fences, and we have the Iron Dome above us and everything, and we are physically in a castle. But and I don't think this was the intention. And when I have now 7 grandchildren, the oldest 7 and the youngest 1, I see already what's happening in Israel, and I think when I'm here we disagree a little bit. The grandchildren between 5 and 7, I have 3 of them, they already hate Arabs.
That's much more like
And I don't know if you know who my wife is, and they didn't get it at home. They get it in the kindergarten. And I come and I speak to the 7-year-old, and he explains me why he hates Arabs. And I'm hesitating what to do. If he stands up in a class and he said, my grandpa say you're wrong, he is an outcast, and I want normal kids. And you cannot have normal kids in this castle. You cannot. They are being brainwashed at school to hate. And by the way, on the other side too. The other side too. Both sides are teaching each other to hate. This was the intention. If this was the intention, we were all wrong. It's not a pleasure to live in such a castle, and I don't know if it can go on. I don't know if it can go on. We have to change the situation there and build a home for both people. As long as we will have some of them living in a castle and some of them have nothing, the Nakba will haunt us. The Jews, the Israelis, it will haunt us all, and it cannot go on.
Just one example on the Israeli citadel. There are no connection flights from Ben Gurion Airport. Think on it. There are no connection flights. It is a dead end. You fly to Israel, it is dead end. No connections. Okay? Now, this is abnormal. Definitely abnormal. We have to change it.
When we try to solve the conflict, one of the conditions to have a discussion is to, if you relate at all, I'm not speaking on accepting the narrative, relate to the narrative of the other side. Israel does not accept the narrative and does not relate to the narrative. For Israel, the events of 1948 was its independence celebration, its creation, and nothing else. And no Nakba, you cannot even promote the idea of Nakba in Israel. We had about 2-3 weeks ago in Israel a ceremony of 8,000 people done by an organization of bereaved families from both sides, Jewish Israelis and Palestinians, bereaved families, people who lost from both sides relatives in the conflict, and came to cry together to cry together. Israeli government hates it. The Minister of Defense tried to prevent the Palestinians from entering the ceremony. Supreme Court allowed it.
Think with me how remarkable it is that after 70 years of the kind of depredations we've been describing, the Palestinian people are still there. The Israeli project did not get rid of them. They're there, and they're everywhere, and everybody knows about them, and they're alive and active and hopefully alive and on the way to making a decent future for themselves and for the people who currently live in my homeland, Jewish Israelis.
It would be really good if you could contribute something in terms of what can Britain, the British government, the British people, the British politicians contribute today to ending the very tragic situation that we observe in the Middle East.
Two of the questions, one, Gaza. I belong to the part of the Israeli population that feels terrible about what's happening. We are not the majority. An average Israeli, the majority of the Israelis will tell you it's organized. If they cross the fence, they kill us all, and so on. I think a country, a regional power like Israel, that destroyed the nuclear abilities of Iraq and the nuclear abilities of Syria, and admitted, can handle such a demonstration differently. We have all the equipment, and the orders are to shoot live fire, and it's 45 people killed, and the orders were not changed. I'm on the advisory council of B'Tselem, one of the Israeli organizations, who called the soldier to disobey the order. We don't see the disobedience here. We don't see them disobeying yet. Maybe it will come. Europe toppled the apartheid. I'm not speaking on the beginning in the 70s, the Scandinavians, Sweden, Norway, and their unions and students and so on. I'm speaking on the EU. Summer of '86, the EU, then 12 countries, sanctioned South Africa. Today, the EU, 28, soon 27, cannot do anything. It's not doing it. And I don't think Europe is weaker. The world has changed. The world has changed. And there is a reluctance on the part of Europe to intervene, to exercise pressure. Definitely not sanctions.
I just want to make sure that we retain the focus on Britain and our shame. I mean, I relate much of what I've heard to listening to David Lammy talk about the Windrush generation. With respect to my neighbour, it is still the case that Cypriots and Kashmiris and our Ulster people bear the wounds of the particular British way of running the world when we had the power to do that.
If we, as British, begin to look at our colonial past more transparently and more fully and acknowledge, it would mean that in my view, it would mean that some of our cherished opinions and our programmed mindsets would need to be revised, ditched, at least opened up. Programmed mindsets lead to the dialogue of the deaf. It's a truism, we all know this. I'm not saying anything new. On the other hand, acknowledgement of the legitimacy of the history of the other group, the other nation, the other aborted nation, is, in my view, a potential route, a possible stepping stone, one of 20 stepping stones that may be needed towards a dialogue of listeners. And which is the more important? Which is the more fruitful dialogue? The dialogue of the deaf or the dialogue of listeners? In my view, there will be no progress on any of this issue, really, no real progress as far as the Brits are concerned, until we have clean hands. And at the moment, we don't have clean hands. And acknowledgement, in my view, would be one way of beginning to clean our hands.
If the British public were to mobilize around the humanitarian catastrophe that is Gaza, and the UN says by 2020, which is only 2 years away, it's really unlivable there, and we're talking about a population of 2 million. And it's, what, 40 kilometers long by 11 kilometers wide at its broadest point. So we're talking about a camp, whether you call it a prison camp or a refugee camp or a cramped camp that is only going to get worse.
I would love to see our Parliament debate Gaza tomorrow. There has not been a debate in Parliament on Gaza for 2 or 3 years. It's important.
History gets always created by very, very small amount of very active people. And maybe the Balfour Declaration is one such big reminder for us, because that came about because few very passionate people were active. And I think it's the same with British government today and the question of recognition. I'm always shocked by how strangely coy Britain is in the world, and how much is not willing to seize the power that is available to it in the world.
I think the British government should now recognise the state of Palestine on 1967 lines and should uphold the law without fear or favour. I want to see a sovereign Palestinian state in my lifetime, and I believe that the UK can do much to help bring it about. Under international law, settlements, all settlements, are illegal in the absence of a negotiated agreement on territorial borders. So is indiscriminate rocket fire. So is disproportionate use of force. The good thing about the law is that it tends not to change unless by consensus. And that can be a help to sustain the prospect of two states if the law is applied in deed as well as in word.
What will happen if Britain will recognize Palestine? I'll take a risk. If Britain will recognize Palestine as a government and stick to it, not chicken out a week after the backlash of Netanyahu, there will be a Palestinian state. I'm ready to put all my money on it. Yes. And I can analyze it for a few minutes, but I don't have even a few minutes. But this will be an unbelievable earthquake. Yeah. It will come as a shock to Israel and as a huge encouragement to the Palestinians.
The idea of recognition is not new. 130 countries have done it. Peaceful coexistence for two states within secure boundaries, but giving the Palestinians something to invest in and giving the Israelis a sense of security, which they crave, is, I think, what the project is about. We have more power than we think. We have more influence than we think. It's a matter of directing it.